All right. Well, welcome everyone that's watching. Welcome to another 21-minute live event. Joining me today is Josh LeQuire, Chief Operation Officer, Agile-extraordinaire, one of the best people I know when it comes to cleaning up technical debt as we continue our quest to Salesforce responsibly. This time, we are here in 21 minutes to try to answer why should you avoid building straight into production? What are some of the simple yet good practices that anyone can adopt when it comes to change management? Why is it crucial to define the words ready and done? And what are some simple steps that can be taken with regards to documentation and organization? The goal here is to try to put a very simple solution for companies that are watching that may not have a ton of resources for some super powerful tools out there. But before we begin, big shout out for those joining from the Fort Lauderdale admin community. And then Josh, thank you so much for participating.
Hey,
Josh, let's get right started, man. Listen, you and I talked for a long time. It's awesome to have you on board. Tell me, why should someone avoid developing and building straight in production, as tempting as it may be?
Yeah, I think it's deceptively simple, right? It's the law of unintended consequences. A lot of times when you change things in production, particularly if you have a lot of automation running in your org, you may inadvertently shut something down or cause conflicts in automated type setups that you want to avoid. Likewise, if you are having people test in sandboxes, if you have other developers working with you, consultants working with you, or an extended team, you have changes in production that are not in other sandboxes where there's work in progress, you lose the capability really to harmonize all these efforts together and make sure there are no conflicts. There are a lot of things you could do in production that are relatively safe. Anything that's additive in terms of creating a new field, a lot of cases changing a layout or a lightning page are pretty innocuous. As you start thinking about things like process builders, flows, Apex especially, components, as you get into more complex automations, then that's where you really need to think about doing changes outside of your production environment, not only to avoid those potential conflicts, but also to test and make sure everything's working as intended before you change something in production. The last thing you want to see is your organization being shut down or losing critical dollars in your opportunity pipeline, or service cases being delayed, or service quality suffering because you made a change and something broke and it was largely invisible. It's those invisible changes that are the most dangerous.
Yeah, I can totally relate to a couple of those stories, man. Recently, actually, we got re-engaged with the customer. We did an implementation several years ago, and their admin did so much work in production that the test classes were so obsolete. For those that may not know that are watching, you need 75% code coverage to deploy. And like there, I think we're down to 40 something, 46, 47. And it was just, we got blindsided by that, but it was just so much more work, right? Because everything was so far out of sync. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Considering that, then, what are some of the simple yet some good practices that anybody can adopt when it comes to change management? It's how can we fight that urge to just skip steps and do everything straight in production?
Yeah, I think the simplest thing you can do is spin up a sandbox. That's at a base element, just getting a copy of your metadata into another sandbox. If you're fortunate enough to have a full sandbox that has like data to production, if you're fortunate to use a partial sandbox, which many folks have, that's super helpful because then you actually have some data. You don't have to worry about creating data in a developer or developer pro sandbox. That's usually step one. If you want to take it up a notch, it's always good to have a strategy for how you move changes up. Starting in a lower environment, think about testing specifically. It's one thing to put something together. It's another thing to test. One thing you can always do and should always do is test. Eric, to your point about deploying changes, if you start in a sandbox and you start promoting to other sandboxes or production, you're going to find out right away whether or not you've met that code coverage. Likewise, things that happen in production, to the story you mentioned before, and I saw this recently with a client, if you're doing things like implementing validation rules on an object, what that could do is cause code to silently fail. We had a client put some validation rules on the opportunity object that caused the opportunity trigger to fail, which was largely invisible to most, and it wasn't really surfaced until we ran tests in production, saw tests were failing. And of course, when unit tests fail in Apex, that means there's functionality in Apex that's not working as intended or as designed. And validation rules are a common culprit in that. Although they seem safe on the surface, they can have large, massive cascading unintended consequences. But just having a strategy for how you manage changes, that includes doing things in a lower sandbox, that includes testing. But specifically, you mentioned something earlier when you were introducing me about definition of ready and definition of done. There's a lot of work you can do up front to really vet solutions with your business, prioritize solutions with your business, not only to make sure that changes are happening correctly in terms of starting in a lower environment, promoting those up and doing testing, but also making sure that you're covering the right needs for the business. One thing I see often, and this is very normal, is we kind of rush to a solution first when we encounter a problem instead of really thinking through what is the problem, what's the root cause of the problem, what do we really need to be accomplishing here? So a lot of times solutions are put together too hastily, and this happens in production as well, where what is it they say, to a hammer everything looks like a nail. Oh, we need a new object for this, or we're just going to create a workflow task, when the real solution might be rethinking how you're managing your data, or rethinking a process or a flow.
There's a lot of interesting things that you just said there. And actually, it was really interesting to hear just jumping into solutions and doing the solutions for the sake of solutions, because it is a common thing. And a big shout out to Matt Straney from the Fort Lauderdale community. I saw that he dropped a comment there that it's very hard to get to 75% sometimes. So keeping all that in mind, I'm going to slide this question in there. How do you manage when there's a particular rush? Because I agree with you, like there's too many people that just say, oh yeah, let's just build this. Let's just do this workflow here. Let's just do that there. And there's not enough people asking why. But I think a lot of times when you do start asking why, people are just like, wait, why are you slowing it down? I just asked you to do this, right? Or similar to Matt's point, it's tough to get to 75. It's tough to get 75. The good process is to have 100, and a lot of people are just sliding it by with 74.6 or 4999, however whatever minimum we can do to round. So is there anything you can talk about with regards to mitigating that rush, setting some expectations and buying yourself the time to get a project done properly?
Absolutely. We talk a lot with our clients about establishing a center of excellence, or a COE for Salesforce, in your business. That center of excellence includes not only the resources you need, like an admin, developers, architects, partners, whoever needs to be a part of that solution, but also a good process for how changes are made. A lot of times, if you just have a simple, for example, a defect entry form, we call this the 7 steps, where somebody in the business finds a bug. Well, tell me the URL where you found the bug, the steps to reproduce, send me a screenshot, what you expected to happen, what actually happened, and so forth. You can use a very common best practice and agreed upon process to give you that right speed. Now, process is necessary when you have more than one person, more than 2 people in many cases, working on a common thing, right? So that common thing might be working on Salesforce. It might be making a change to Salesforce. The process allows you to put the right rigor in place to manage the risk. That's what processes are for. So in a lot of cases, whether it's reporting a defect, whether it's requesting an enhancement, if you have a very simple process defined for how you take in that information, how you analyze the information, how you go through solutioning, how you build, how you test, how you train, and ultimately deploy, you're going to solve a lot of that problem of, hey, let's make waste instead of making haste, right? Which is not ever good for anybody, because going too fast has the unintended consequences problem, but going too slow has the responsiveness problem. And that's the beauty of Salesforce, and frankly, why I switched back in 2013 from working on Microsoft to Salesforce, is you can do a lot more. Just because you can do a lot more doesn't necessarily always mean you should, and you should do it quickly. You still have to apply that right level of risk management thinking, that right level of rigor to match the risk of the changes you're making to ensure that you're doing it right.
Right. And that's a really good point that you have there. So, and kind of talking about it, you're trying to make waste, not haste. And one of the big things, coming back to the point you were talking about, what about the words ready and done, right? Because a lot of times we're having conversations with stakeholders and everyone has their own expectation. Some people are more in a rush to get something delivered than others. So a lot of times the words, oh, this is ready or this is done, is thrown out there. But if you tell me something something's ready and I go and I test and something isn't working, then there's an issue, right? Because at least for me, I say you've tested it, you've validated this, whatever the case may be. So you're a big proponent of defining those two keywords. Talk to me a little bit more about how important those words are, and at least for you guys, what do they mean, and should they always mean the same to everyone?
So ready and done are critical foundational tenets of Agile. And I'm a huge proponent of Agile. I've been waterfall trained. I was PMP certified way back in the day, made the switch in 2013 and haven't looked back since. But Agile doesn't necessarily mean you throw away rigor. It means you have the right rigor to focus on development over documentation and all those wonderful things you've read in the Agile Manifesto, right? The principal tenets of ready and done mean we all have a common, agreed upon, very concrete, clear definition of when we're ready to build something. That's typically going to look like a checklist. For example, if we're needing to ingest, certain data points, what does that look like from an object and field modeling perspective? If we need to build a component, what might a mock-up or a wireframe look like so a developer can actually pick that up and build it out? If we're engineering an integration, what is the data flow? How do we have two systems talking to each other? When did they talk to each other? What fields are being sent from point A to point B? How do they map? And so forth. So there is a certain level of thinking that if you take the time to do that up front, you're going to mitigate 90 to 95% of the risk of getting it wrong versus just saying, hey, we're going to stand up this object, we're going to stand up this integration, and then finding out 4 to 6 weeks later, oh, crap, we did this terribly wrong. We need to go back and fix it. Now we have a migration project on our hands because we created an object, put data in it, you need to put in something else. You just doubled your work by not giving it the proper level of thinking. So the beauty of the definition ready is not only is it a transparent checklist for what needs to be done to get something ready to build, but it's also a contract you have with your business stakeholders, particularly for you folks who have felt this pain as I've felt working with a lot of sales and marketing people who are like, go, go, go. We have business. We have business. We need to move fast. We're losing leads. We're losing opportunities. There's a certain level of, okay, well, let's slow down and speed up. Let's really understand the problem we're trying to solve. Let's make sure we're hitting it the right way. 80% of the time, this is sort of the Pareto principle, right? 80% of the time, these problems are actually pretty quick and easy to solve. If we put the right level of thinking into it, we can all agree that, hey, this solution to put in a new workflow rule or to build a new set of fields on this object is the right solution versus, oh, let's build 3 or 4 custom objects. Let's integrate them to this other system. Let's run all these rules of Apex and workflow on top of that. Next thing you know, you have this giant mess when really could have been solved with just a couple of fields if we just spent 5 more minutes really thinking about the problem. So that's the definition of ready. What do we think we need, and what does everybody agree we need to get something done? And honestly, that's enough process right there to make sure that you have enough information up front to know what to build, manage that risk, mitigate that risk of technical debt. The definition of done is on the flip side of that. Now that we've actually built something, when do we all agree this is done? And that can manifest in several ways. We have at the Codery a story level done, which says all tasks have been completed on the story. The product owner accepts the story. Unit tests have been written where we have Apex code and need that coverage. We're constantly, you talked about unit tests earlier. We're constantly writing unit tests up front. We don't wait for that at the end. We write the unit tests as part of a story itself being done. That in and of itself solves a lot of that 47% code coverage problem you mentioned before. Do the test now, don't do it later. Don't put that off. That's a big role we follow. Likewise with done, we agree on what testing needs to take place. We agree whether or not that's manual functional testing to go through a story, whether there's some level of automated testing. Some more sophisticated shops have things like Selenium and Jasmine and other types of automated testing toolkits that are super effective in doing things on the front end and back end. We could certainly have a whole conversation around that one day. And done is also at the sprint level as well. So as we carve out things for the sprint, anything that's not done in the sprint, we agree goes back in the backlog or goes into the next sprint. We agree that any potential show-stopping defects need to be done before we complete a sprint, because the ultimate goal of a sprint is to have a working product increment you could deploy today, unit tested, covered, ready to go. Likewise, we also have a release level of done. So this is where we're typically promoting things to an environment that has ideally, if you're working with integrations, for example, ideally has, sort of a QA or staging environment for integration. So we can run things through an end-to-end integrated flow to make sure everything's working in an environment that looks and feels a lot like production, where you have integrations and more complex types of automation. those pieces of done ensure that, hey, we didn't go too fast and put something out there in the wild that completely broke everything the business is doing. A lot of businesses run their sales, marketing, and service departments on Salesforce. So think about it. If you break something that prohibits that, you're causing your business to lose money. You're causing problems for other people and making their jobs a lot harder when we're already all pretty stretched thin as is in many cases. So agreeing on ready, agreeing on done are often the very best pieces of process you can implement, if anything, in this whole end-to-end flow of making changes to your Salesforce.
Yeah, I think those are some very, very good points there because it's very easy to just jump right in and get things done. And there's so much to add there, but I'm a big proponent of saying nobody goes to work to do a bad job, right? But mistakes always seem to occur. So it's one of those things where it's like you can try to see how far away you can get, and you're drifting away from the normal procedure further and further, or the suggested procedure further and further away until something goes terribly wrong, right? And but until then, everything seems fine because I've been getting away and I've been managing it so far. Where really what's happening is that we're building a house of cards that could, that sometimes we're not even aware of. So I think that, yeah, I agree with you 100%. And there was something you said earlier, and I think it reminded me of an Albert Einstein quote. And he said, I think he said something to the tune of, if I only have 1 hour to solve a problem, I'll spend 55 minutes thinking about what to do and 5 minutes doing it. Right.
Yeah.
And that one stuck with me for a really long time because I agree with it. Sometimes you have to visualize. Sometimes when you sit down and you draw it out, the problem, I know it takes more time. I know some people don't care. Some people sometimes come to you with solutions instead of problems, or instead of issues that they're trying to solve. So navigating that and working that, whether you're a consultant or whether you're an administrator, I think that it pays a lot of dividends to do that. So let's talk a little bit about, with the time we have left then, and kind of close in with the last point, which what are some of the simple steps that can be taken with regards to documentation in an organization? We talk about making sure everyone's on the same page, and a lot of times not everyone can afford like a Flowsum or a Capado or these crazy tools to manage everything. But if you're a small admin that's listening to this, how can they put some basic things together, whether it's using some simple tools or something that's easy to access that can help them keep themselves organized with incoming requests, with builds, with documentation? What can be done here?
Yeah, I think it really starts with object-oriented thinking, right? We talk a lot about object-oriented programming and what we do, but object-oriented thinking. So the common problem I see on the flip side of that coin with a lot of admins, especially in smaller shops, is, we're thinking too big. Oh, we got to solve the entire service process or service function of this organization. Well, not really. You may want to solve for getting an email and creating a case off of that and something like email to case, right? So first things first, scope things down into parts, scope things down into that kind of object oriented thinking. And when I say object, I don't mean Salesforce object. I mean a thing, a problem you're trying to solve on something you can bite off and chew. Um, a lot of times just doing that in and of itself helps you to get a clear definition of a problem or definition of an opportunity for an enhancement or an expansion of your Salesforce org you want to define. The second piece of that I would say is, consider, sort of flow-based thinking as well. I've had the massive benefit of receiving a lot of process design and process improvement training. I understand a lot of folks don't have that same kind of background, but just simply sitting down and drawing on a whiteboard, the steps from start to finish that you need to take to accomplish something. And again, all these things I'm talking about, we're not talking about solutions, right? We're not talking about email to case. We're not talking about omnichannel. We're not talking about lead routing. We're not talking about queues. We're not talking, fill in the blank, right? We're always starting with, what am I trying to solve? That is arguably the most important thinking that needs to happen, because everything stems off of that. If you have any fault in your logic or any fault in attacking that business analysis, everything downstream is broken, right? It all starts right there. So taking that time, really think about things in smaller parts, thinking about the flow of activities, thinking about, players inside of that flow. Who starts the process? What is he or she doing? Where does it go next? At the end of the process, what are we trying to accomplish? There's a piece of this where you can almost treat this in terms of inputs, processes, and outputs. What are we taking in? So let's say, for example, we're consuming an order from an external system. Now that we have that order, what do we need to do with it? Well, one, we might need to create a product for that order inside of Salesforce. Another thing we might need to do is find a related case that created that order and link the two together. Another thing we might need to do is find an opportunity related to that and close that order. So really sit down and think about this thing in very small parts, break it apart, and try and break it apart to as small as you can, because what ultimately you will do for yourself is give yourself the opportunity to scope something you can accomplish within a week or 2 weeks. Now, that being said, as you look at all these pieces and pull it together, I would consider do some high level solution architecture and technical architecture before you actually start building, because this little problem you're trying to solve may cascade into a bigger problem if you don't consider how it integrates into the whole. So there's this, hey, let's go ahead and solve the problem at hand, but let's pull it back up to the bigger picture and see how this integrates with the whole, and make sure that we're putting together solutions that are cohesive, coherent, and integral to what you're doing today. Pieces that, oh, hey, I've got a requirement in my backlog 2 or 3 months from now to build this very robust order management system. Maybe we can consider pieces of that requirement in today's solution, so that we don't build something today we'll have to go back and rebuild later to accomplish that big thing in the future. So part of this too, behind the scenes, is organizing a true backlog, right? So if you're lucky enough to have a tool like Jira, we use Jira pretty heavily here at theCodery, or Trello, or Airtable. We love Airtable. In fact, that's one of our favorite clients as well. These are great tools to put things in, organize, prioritize, and organize your work. As you're looking to solve problems as well, the flowcharts I find especially helpful. Just going into a sandbox sometimes and just prototyping things out very safely in an environment that nobody's touching. Hey, you think omnichannel might solve this problem? Well, go in there and configure it and see if it works. Do a little proof of concept. Doing proofs of concepts are just massively beneficial, not only to solve a given problem, but also to flesh out other requirements. A lot of times you get requirements from your business that are half-baked, that may not have all the details you need, or may sound like they want to solve problem A, but it's really solving problem B. And a lot of times business people you're working with as an admin don't have a technical background. So they may not, bless their hearts, as we say here in Charleston, they may not really know what they're asking for, right? So oftentimes putting something in somebody's hands that they can look at, touch and feel and work through will not only get you to the solution you need, but also inform the problem and inform the requirement that you're trying to solve. So there's a little bit of that back and forth of, okay, here's what I think we're trying to solve. Here's what the solution looks like. Does this make sense? No. Okay, we're actually trying to solve that. Okay, now that we have a better problem definition solved, does this solution work? Great. And once you iron all that stuff out, the risk of not solving the problem correctly is gone. You've really worked those kinks out. So that's a great way to get to the solution. And then, of course, once you're managing your build work, always think about testing first. We too often say, oh, shit, we got a UAT coming up next week. We didn't write any test scripts, and think about this. No. Do that from the beginning. You almost, there's this thing out there called behavior-driven development, test-driven development, where, the idea in programming is you write your test code first before you even write your class. And you can apply this technique a lot to how you build out stories or how you build out requirements for Salesforce. Ultimately in the day, somebody's going to be using this. What do I need to make sure it's supposed to do and not do? And even taking that approach to thinking about how you're going to test what you're building to solve this problem could inform requirements as well. So these are all techniques we use at theCodery. We've got this pretty standardized in our delivery playbook. We're doing these things constantly, but these are just super helpful practices anybody can do every day. We leave these behind for our clients all the time.
I mean, I think that's an awesome way to start concluding these, but there's so many awesome takeaways, and I totally agree with you. The proof of concept goes a long way, especially to put some light into the problem and validate. Certainly, the benefits of working in a sandbox environment. I love the test basing approach. There's just so much there. A question for you as we're trying to wrap up. Do you have, like, this playbook that you mentioned, is it something that could be available or could be made public? Like, maybe take out some, I don't know if there's anything that's internal or private, but is there anything that someone could reference for if someone that's interested in learning more, or should they reach out to you? What can we do here?
Yeah, I wish we could publish that, but that's sort of the core of our business and how we do things. But we do publish quite a bit on our blog. And in fact, we have a couple of neat things we're doing out there. For example, for nonprofits, we have this digital nonprofit email series you can sign up for that sends a lot of this kind of content out. It's a 10 email series. It's a free course, and certainly want to encourage folks to sign up for that and reach out to me if you're interested in that. But generally, yeah, we're trying to publish as much as we can out there. It would be nice one day to write a book about this stuff, because there's definitely, I would say 80 or 90% of the time we go into a project with a client, we're seeing some common symptoms and common problems. And again, this is not because anybody's malicious or anybody's ignorant or anybody is doing anything with ill intent. It's just more of, as you go through this and do this over and over again and see the same things, you realize, oh, this is kind of normal. So, yeah, just stay in tune with our blog and what we're publishing. And, if you have questions or need any help, always reach out. We're happy to help. We work with, we focus on small to mid-sized businesses. So that's our sweet spot where we help us.
I think this is a perfect way to close. If you could send me the link to your blog, I'm happy to post it on the description of this video for anybody that is listening in and wants to get more information. And you hit the nail on the head when you said that, there's people, this isn't intentional. A lot of times, there's these common trends and shortcomings of projects, but it's not because people are intentionally doing it. It's just that they don't know any better, and you don't know what you don't know, and so many times. So it kind of gives me to my segue of closing it off, with the big Spider-Man quote that Uncle Ben used to say, with great power comes great responsibility. So everyone watching, remember to always Salesforce responsibly so you can keep building amazing solutions out there. Listen, Josh, this was an absolute blast. I really enjoyed it. And for those that are watching, Josh and I were talking about doing more of these, and hopefully one of these, once the whole situation gets better, we do it with beer in hand and a grill right in between us. So listen, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Josh. And we'll see you guys in the next video.